The dining room glowed with the warm light of candles, their flames flickering against the polished wood of the table. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and the clink of glasses as our closest friends and family raised a toast to 20 years of marriage. To Jake and Melissa, Laura, my sister, declared, her glass of champagne held high. 2 decades of love, loyalty, and laughter. The room erupted in cheers, and I glanced at Melissa, her smile radiant as she clinked her glass with mine. She looked beautiful tonight, dressed in an elegant black dress that hugged her figure. Her golden hair was swept up, revealing the delicate curve of her neck where I'd kissed her just hours earlier. For a moment, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude. 20 years, and I still couldn't believe how lucky I was. "Thank you, everyone," I said, standing to address the group. "Melissa and I are so grateful to have you all here. These past 20 years have been a journey, full of challenges, yes, but also full of love and growth. I couldn't have asked for a better partner in life." Melissa squeezed my hand as everyone applauded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "And I couldn't have asked for a better husband," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for those closest to hear. As the night wore on, the mood became more relaxed. Plates were cleared, and the soft hum of music played in the background as conversations broke off into smaller groups. I found myself in a corner with my best friend, Mark, reminiscing about our college days, while Melissa mingled effortlessly among our guests. "She's glowing tonight," Mark said, nodding toward her. "You've got a good one, Jake." "I know," I said, smiling. "I really do." We talked for a while longer, but I kept an eye on Melissa, watching as she laughed with Laura and clinked glasses with our neighbor, Kathy. She always had a way of lighting up a room, drawing people to her with her warmth and charm. It was one of the things I loved most about her. The doorbell rang, interrupting the soft hum of conversation. I frowned, glancing at my watch. It was nearly 10. Everyone we'd invited was already here. "I'll get it," I said, excusing myself. I opened the door to find a man I didn't recognize standing on the porch. He was tall, dressed casually in a leather jacket and jeans, his dark hair slightly disheveled. There was something about his expression, calm, almost smug, that set me on edge. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice polite but firm. "Jake, right?" he said, his voice smooth and self-assured. "I'm Eric. I'm here to see Melissa." My stomach tightened. "Melissa?" I repeated, glancing back toward the dining room. "Do I know you?" He smirked, shaking his head. "Not yet." I stepped aside, unsure of what else to do, and he walked past me into the house as if he owned the place. My heart began to pound as I followed him into the dining room, where the laughter and conversation abruptly ceased. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at Eric, their expressions a mix of confusion and curiosity. Melissa, who had been standing near the table with Laura and Kathy, froze. Her smile faltered, and her face went pale. "Eric," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Melissa," he replied, his tone casual, as if he were greeting an old friend. "You didn't think I'd let your big night go by without saying hello, did you?" The tension in the room was palpable. I glanced at Melissa, my mind racing. Who was this man? And why did the sight of him seem to drain the color from her face? "Melissa, what's going on?" I asked, my voice low but steady. She opened her mouth to respond, but Eric beat her to it. "Maybe I should explain," he said, stepping forward. "You see, Melissa and we've been seeing each other for a while now." A collective gasp rippled through the room. I stared at him, his words not fully registering. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice rising. "I think you heard me," Eric said, his tone calm, almost amused. "Melissa and I have been having an affair." The room erupted in chaos. Laura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Mark muttered a stunned, "Jesus Christ." Melissa looked like she might faint, her eyes darting between me and Eric as if searching for an escape. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "It's not a joke," Eric said, his gaze steady. "Ask her yourself." I turned to Melissa, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Melissa, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Is it true? Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I'm so sorry, Jake, she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted you to find out like this. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My mind reeled as I tried to process her words, her admission. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not after everything we'd built together. How long? I asked, my voice hoarse. Melissa hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayal, of coming home to me every night and pretending everything was fine. My hands clenched into fists as a wave of anger surged through me. You've been lying to me for 6 months? I said, my voice rising. You brought this man into our lives, into our home, and lied to my face? Jake, please, she said, stepping toward me. It wasn't like that. Don't, I snapped, taking a step back. Don't you dare try to justify this. The room was silent, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone like a heavy fog. Eric stood there, his expression infuriatingly calm, while Melissa looked like she might collapse. I could feel the eyes of our friends and family on me, their shock and pity cutting through me like a knife. I think you should leave, I said finally, my voice cold and firm. Eric smirked, but he nodded. Fair enough. I've said my piece. He turned and walked out, leaving a trail of tension and unease in his wake. As the door closed behind him, I looked around the room, at the faces of the people who had come to celebrate our marriage, and then at Melissa, whose tear-streaked face was a picture of regret. I need some air, I said, my voice hollow. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside me. The sounds of the party, now reduced to hushed whispers, faded into the background as I stood there, staring into the darkness. 20 years. 20 years of love, of trust, of building a life together. And it had all come crashing down in an instant. The night air was sharp against my skin, but it couldn't cut through the storm raging inside me. I stood on the porch, staring out at the empty street, my chest heaving as I tried to process what had just happened. The laughter and warmth of the celebration were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. My wife, the woman I'd built my life with, had betrayed me. And she hadn't just betrayed me. She'd done it so brazenly that her lover had shown up at our anniversary party to announce it. The door behind me creaked open, and I heard soft footsteps. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on me. Jake, Melissa said, her voice trembling. Please, can we talk? I clenched my jaw, gripping the wooden railing so hard I thought it might splinter. Talk? I said, my voice cold. You want to talk? After what just happened in there? Yes, she said, stepping closer. I owe you an explanation. I let out a bitter laugh, finally turning to face her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but it wasn't enough to stir any sympathy in me. An explanation? I said. You think there's anything you can say that will make this better? That will make me forget what just happened? Her lips trembled, and tears welled in her eyes. I never wanted you to find out like this, she said softly. I never wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to hurt me? I snapped, my voice rising. Then maybe you shouldn't have been sneaking around with another man for 6 months. Maybe you should have thought about how this would affect me, how it would affect us, before you threw everything away. She flinched at my words, her hands wringing together as she struggled to respond. Jake, I've been so lost, she said finally. I've felt so disconnected, like we've been living separate lives. And then Eric came back into my life, and it was like I remembered who I used to be. I stared at her, incredulous. So what? You felt disconnected, and instead of talking to me, you decided to have an affair? You thought that would fix things? It wasn't about fixing things, she said, her voice breaking. I wasn't trying to replace you. I just needed to feel alive again. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Alive. As if our life together, The life we'd built over 20 years wasn't enough for her. The door opened again, and Laura stepped out, her expression a mix of concern and anger. "Jake," she said carefully, glancing between me and Melissa, "maybe you should come back inside. The guests are, well, they don't know what to do." I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. "Let them leave. The party's over." "Jake, please," Melissa said, her voice desperate. "Let me explain. Let me try to make this right." I turned to her, my anger boiling over. "You don't get to make this right, Melissa. Not after what you did. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it." She sobbed, her tears spilling over as Laura gently guided her back inside. I stayed on the porch, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. Over the next hour, the house emptied out. One by one, our guests said their awkward goodbyes, their faces etched with pity and discomfort. Mark was one of the last to leave, clapping me on the shoulder as he passed. "If you need anything, Jake," he said quietly, "you call me. Anytime." I nodded, unable to muster a response. The house felt impossibly quiet once everyone was gone, the silence amplifying the chaos in my mind. Melissa was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her head in her hands. I didn't want to look at her, but I couldn't avoid her forever. I walked in, the tension between us thick and suffocating. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Jake," she said softly, "please." I sat down across from her, the weight of the evening settling heavily on my shoulders. "Start talking," I said, my voice flat. "And don't leave anything out." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "It started after that charity event at the gallery," she said, her voice shaky. "Eric was there, and we started talking. I hadn't seen him in years, and it felt familiar. Easy. We exchanged numbers, and at first it was just texts. Nothing serious. And then?" I prompted, my tone cold. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "And then it became more. We met for coffee, then for lunch. And then, it just happened. I didn't plan for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't plan for it? Melissa, you've been sneaking around for 6 months. That's not something that just happens." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I've betrayed you, Jake. I know I've broken your trust. But I swear to you, it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You let this man into your life, into our life, and you're going to sit here and tell me it didn't mean anything? Do you even hear yourself?" She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice muffled. "I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe you can't," I said coldly. "Maybe this isn't something that can be fixed." The silence between us was deafening. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough to erase what she'd done. It wasn't enough to undo the damage her betrayal had caused. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight," I said, my voice firm. "And tomorrow. I don't know. I need time to think." "Jake, please," she said, standing as well. "I love you. I don't want to lose you." I turned to her, my expression hard. "You should have thought about that before you started this affair, Melissa." I walked out of the kitchen, her sobs echoing behind me as I made my way to the guest room. The bed felt unfamiliar, the pillows too stiff, but I didn't care. All I cared about was making it through the night without falling apart completely. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room with a stiff neck and a head that felt like it had been run through a blender. Sunlight seeped through the blinds, casting long stripes across the room. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an eternity, replaying the events of the previous night. The revelation, the betrayal, Melissa's tears, my anger. I didn't want to get up, but I knew I couldn't stay in that bed forever. The kids would be up soon, and while they weren't home for the anniversary dinner, they'd know something was wrong if they saw me holed up in the guest room. When I stepped into the kitchen, Melissa was already there, sitting at the table with a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. Her eyes were puffy and red, her face pale. She looked up as I entered, her expression hopeful and broken all at once. "Good morning," she said quietly. I grunted in response, walking to the counter to pour myself a cup of coffee. The silence between us was heavy, thick with unspoken words. I could feel her gaze on me, but I didn't look at her. "Jake," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I know you're hurting. I know I've shattered your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I need to know, is there any chance for us? For this?" Her question hung in the air, sharp and raw. I turned to face her, my chest tightening as I looked at the woman who had been my partner for 20 years. The woman who had shared my life, my dreams, my bed, and who had betrayed me. "I don't know," I said honestly, my voice cold but steady. "Right now, I can't even look at you without thinking about what you did. How you lied to me. How you chose him over us." She flinched at my words, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't choose him," she said, her voice trembling. "I chose you, Jake. I ended things with Eric before the party. I wanted to focus on us." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You ended it? Is that supposed to make me feel better? You spent 6 months lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now you think you deserve a gold star for finally ending it? It doesn't work that way, Melissa." The sound of footsteps on the stairs cut through the tension. Caleb and Megan shuffled into the kitchen, their groggy faces lighting up when they saw us. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, Dad," Caleb said, grabbing a bowl from the cupboard. Megan followed, her hair still a tangled mess from sleep. I forced a smile, nodding at them. "Morning, guys." Melissa wiped her eyes quickly, pasting on a strained smile. "Good morning, sweethearts. What do you want for breakfast?" As she moved to the stove, putting on a show of normalcy, I marveled at how easily she could slip into the role of doting mother, as if nothing had happened. The kids chattered about their plans for the day, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. I envied their ignorance, even as it made my heart ache. After breakfast, I retreated to the backyard, needing space to think. The garden Melissa had planted years ago was still thriving, its flowers blooming in vibrant colors. I sat on the patio, staring at the rows of roses and tulips, wondering if I'd ever be able to look at her without feeling this ache in my chest. Mark called while I was out there, his voice steady and supportive. "How are you holding up, man?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Not great. I don't even know where to start, Mark." She says she ended it, but how am I supposed to believe her? How am I supposed to trust anything she says? "You don't have to decide everything right now," Mark said. "Take your time. Figure out what you want. And if you need anything, anything at all, you call me. Okay?" "Thanks, Mark," I said, my voice heavy. "I appreciate it." Later that afternoon, Melissa and I sat down at the dining room table, the same table where our anniversary dinner had fallen apart less than 24 hours earlier. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "Jake," she said, her voice soft, "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try. I want to earn your trust back. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, whatever you need." I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "Do you even know why you did it?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "Because I don't think you do. And until you figure that out, I don't know if we can move forward." She nodded, her hands trembling. "I was selfish, Jake. I was lonely. I felt like we were drifting apart, and instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst decision of my life. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make it right." Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the pain. They didn't erase the image of Eric standing in our home, his smug expression as he tore apart my world. I thought about our kids, about the life we'd built together. I thought about the 20 years we'd shared, the good, the bad, and everything in between. "I don't know, Melissa," I said finally, my voice heavy. "I don't know if I can forgive you. But for the sake of our family, I'm willing to try. On one condition." She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Anything?" "I need space," I said. "I'm going to move out for a while. I need time to think, to process everything. And you need to do the same. Figure out why you did this. Figure out who you are and who you want to be." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." Packing my bags that evening was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The kids didn't ask questions. but I saw the confusion in their eyes as I hugged them goodbye and told them I'd be staying with Uncle Mark for a while. Melissa stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as I loaded my suitcase into the car. "Jake," she said softly, "I love you." I didn't respond. I climbed into the car and drove away, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Mark's spare room wasn't much. A twin bed shoved against one wall, a narrow desk covered in old coffee stains, and a single window that overlooked the street, but it felt like a sanctuary. It was a space where I could breathe, think, and exist without the constant presence of Melissa's betrayal hanging over me. Mark didn't hover, which I appreciated. He offered a few beers and an open ear when I needed it, but mostly, he left me to my thoughts. And there were plenty of those. The first few days were the hardest. I missed the kids desperately, their laughter, the way Megan always tried to sneak cookies before dinner, and Caleb's sarcastic quips about everything. I hated not being there to see them off to school or to hear about their day, but I knew I needed this distance to figure out where I stood, not just with Melissa, but with myself. I threw myself into work, taking on extra shifts and projects that kept me occupied late into the evenings. The distraction helped, but the silence of Mark's house at night was deafening. My mind would wander, replaying the moment Eric walked into our anniversary dinner, the look on Melissa's face when she admitted the affair, and the endless what-ifs that haunted me. What if I'd noticed the signs sooner? What if I'd been more attentive? What if I'd fought harder for our marriage before it was too late? About a week after I'd moved out, I started therapy. It was Mark's suggestion, more of a gentle shove, really, and though I'd resisted at first, I found myself sitting in a small, neutral-colored office, facing a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Why don't we start with why you're here?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. I hesitated, staring at the floor. "My wife cheated on me," I said finally, the words feeling foreign and raw. "I found out a week ago. She had an affair with someone I thought was a stranger, but it turns out he's an old flame." The therapist nodded, her expression neutral. "That must have been incredibly painful." "It was," I said, my voice tight. "It still is." Over the next hour, I poured out everything. The betrayal, the anger, the confusion, the guilt. I talked about how I'd spent 20 years building a life with Melissa, only to have it shattered in an instant. The therapist listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that forced me to dig deeper. "What do you want now, Jake?" she asked near the end of the session. "What would healing look like for you?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, Melissa kept her word. She started seeing a therapist too, something she mentioned in the occasional text she sent me. The messages were short and to the point. Updates about the kids, reminders about bills. But every so often, she'd include something more personal. "I'm working on myself, Jake. I'm trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I know it doesn't change what I did to you, but I hope it's a start." I didn't always reply. Sometimes I couldn't bring myself to, but I read every word. The kids were another story. I saw them on weekends, taking them out for lunch or to the park, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in their lives. They were cautious around me at first, like they were afraid to say the wrong thing, but eventually, they opened up. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" Caleb asked one afternoon, his voice steady but tinged with worry. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "We're figuring things out," I said. "It's complicated, but we both love you and Megan more than anything. That won't change." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I just want you to be happy, Dad." His words stayed with me long after I dropped them back off at the house. One evening, I got a call from Melissa. I hesitated before answering, my finger hovering over the screen, but something made me pick up. "Jake," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can we meet? Just the two of us. I think we need to talk." I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a small cafe near the edge of town, a place we'd gone to on lazy Saturday mornings when the kids were younger. The familiarity of it was both comforting and unsettling. Melissa was already there when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked nervous, but there was a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "What's on your mind?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She took a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of soul-searching. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. I know I broke your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right, no matter how long it takes. I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Her words were sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough to erase the pain. Why, Melissa? I asked finally. Why did you do it? And don't tell me it just happened. That's not good enough. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I think I was scared, she said softly. Scared of how routine everything had become. Scared that I wasn't enough anymore. And instead of talking to you about it, instead of facing those fears, I ran away. I made the worst mistake of my life. Her honesty caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw the vulnerability beneath her actions, the cracks in the foundation that neither of us had been willing to address. We talked for hours that night, peeling back the layers of our marriage, our fears, and our failures. It wasn't an easy conversation, and it didn't fix everything. But it felt like the beginning of something. A new chapter, maybe, or at least a chance to figure out where we stood. When we left the cafe, Melissa looked at me, her expression tentative. Jake, I know I've said it 100 times, but I'll say it again. I'm sorry. And I love you. I nodded, my chest tightening. I know, and I'm trying to figure out if that's enough. The weeks that followed our meeting at the cafe were a delicate dance between progress and uncertainty. Melissa and I spoke more often, though our conversations were cautious, like walking on cracked ice. Each word carried the weight of our past, every pause a reminder of the trust that had been shattered. For the first time in years, we truly talked, not about errands, the kids' schedules, or the mundane details of life, but about us. About the people we used to be, the couple we had become, and the roles we'd quietly accepted without question. It was messy, painful, and uncomfortably raw, but it was necessary. One evening, I found myself back at the house for dinner with the kids. Caleb and Megan had insisted, excited at the prospect of having both their parents at the table again. Melissa had cooked lasagna, one of my favorites, and the smell wafting through the house as I stepped inside tugged at something deep in my chest. Dad, Megan called, running up to hug me. You're here. Of course I'm here, I said, ruffling her hair. I wouldn't miss it. Melissa appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I replied, the word carrying more meaning than I intended. Dinner was warm, almost nostalgic. The kids chattered away about school and their friends, and for a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But every time Melissa and I locked eyes across the table, I was reminded of the fragile state of our relationship. The weight of what we were trying to rebuild hung over us, unspoken but ever-present. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Melissa and I sat on the back porch. The air was cool and quiet, the stars above twinkling faintly. She handed me a glass of wine, her fingers brushing mine briefly. Thank you for coming tonight, she said, her voice gentle. The kids were so happy to have you here. I was happy to be here, I admitted, taking a sip of wine. I've missed this. I've missed them. She nodded, staring into her glass. And me? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Have you missed me? The question caught me off guard. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 20 years, the woman who had broken my heart. Her vulnerability was palpable, her eyes searching mine for something. Hope, forgiveness, anything to hold on to. I've missed what we used to have, I said honestly, but I don't know if I can get that back. I don't know if we can. Her face crumpled slightly, but she nodded, her voice trembling as she said, I understand. I do. But I want to try, Jake. I want to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. The next morning, I called my therapist. How do you know when it's time to let go? I asked, my voice heavy with uncertainty. She paused, her tone thoughtful. Letting go doesn't always mean walking away, she said. Sometimes it means releasing the expectations, the anger, and the hurt you've been holding on to. It's about deciding what you want your life to look like moving forward, and whether that vision includes your partner. Her words stayed with me, replaying in my mind as I navigated the days ahead. I thought about the life Melissa and I had built, the memories we'd created, and the dreams we'd once shared. I thought about the love we'd had, the love we might still have, buried beneath the rubble of her betrayal. Melissa continued her therapy, sharing small victories with me during our conversations. She talked about the guilt she carried, the way she was working to rebuild her sense of self. For the first time, she wasn't just apologizing. She was taking responsibility, not only for her actions but for the cracks in our marriage that we had both ignored for too long. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said one afternoon as we sat in a park, watching the kids play on the swings. "But I'm not that person anymore, Jake. I've been working so hard to figure out why I made those choices, and I don't ever want to be that person again." Her sincerity was undeniable, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, not a blazing fire, but a small, steady flame. A month later, we attended our first couples therapy session. It was awkward at first, both of us unsure of how to navigate the vulnerability it required. But as the sessions progressed, we began to untangle the web of emotions, the resentment, and the pain that had festered between us for so long. One day, our therapist asked a simple but profound question. "What do you want from each other?" Melissa's answer came quickly. "I want his forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking. "I want him to see that I'm still the woman he loved, that I'm worth fighting for." I hesitated, my chest tightening as I searched for the truth. "I want to trust her again," I said finally. "I want to believe in us, but I'm scared. Scared that I'll never be able to let go of what happened." The road to rebuilding was long and far from smooth. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But there were also moments of connection, of laughter, of glimpses of the love we'd shared. Slowly, cautiously, we began to piece together a new version of our relationship. Not perfect, but honest and intentional. One evening, as we stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Melissa turned to me, her hands dripping with soapy water. "Jake," she said, her voice steady, "thank you for giving us a chance." I looked at her, the woman who had broken my heart but was now fighting to mend it. "Thank you for fighting," I said. "I'm still scared, but I'm willing to try. And that has to mean something." In the months that followed, we continued to rebuild, one step at a time. The scars of her betrayal would never fully fade, but they became part of our story, a story of resilience, of growth, and of learning to love in the face of imperfection. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But as I sat on the porch with Melissa one warm summer evening, the kids' laughter echoing in the background, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be.